John Johnson speaking. I'm serving as Executive Director of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. Glad to have all of you here this morning. We're going to kick this off with remarks first from the Chair of the Michigan Civil Rights Commission, Gloria Lara, who hails from the city of Grand Rapids. She'll bring a few remarks, and then I'll come behind her with some other statements, then we'll begin our program. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Johnson. I follow instructions, and it says, please self-identify by first name before speaking. My name is Gloria Lara. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 Civil Rights Summit. I'm Gloria Lara, and I'm honored to serve as chair of the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. For as long as the commission has been in existence, since 1963, the Michigan Civil Rights Commission has proclaimed the vital importance of fair housing. The Michigan Department of Civil Rights, our operational arm, is responsible for investigating complaints of discrimination in the effort to buy, sell, rent, or finance a home. While no one can deny that we had made progress toward building a more equitable society, we still fall far short of achieving it. Home buyers and renters alike are still being steered away from one community and into another based on race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity, and disability. They are still being denied financing, the only path to home ownership for the vast majority of people of all races, ethnicities, and abilities. They are regularly denied reasonable accommodations to remove barriers and install basic modifications to make the home accessible to a person with a disability. They remain trapped in a home appraisal system that often undervalues the homes of people of color when contrasted with homes that are comparable in every way except they're owned by someone who is white. Last November, the Commission launched a series of public hearings in communities across the state to take testimony directly from people who have first-hand experience with housing discrimination, as well as the people working in local communities, and that includes many of you in this audience, to help secure fair housing for their neighbors. In total, we collected more than 10 hours of testimony from people whose experiences compelled them to tell their stories to a group of people they didn't know, but they felt would listen to them. And we did. These stories have helped us frame the discussions we will have here today. It guided us in selecting knowledgeable sources who could speak to a range of fair housing issues, from emotional support animals and rental properties to the inability to obtain financing for families of color. The stage is set for compelling conversations today on a host of issues around housing discrimination. Note I said conversations. While you'll spend time hearing from experts and experienced advocates, we wouldn't need to hold a summit if we only wanted to hear from them. Especially in our breakout sessions, we have built in space and time for your input, your questions, your experiences, your ideas. I encourage you to take advantage of these opportunities to share your point of view, to ask the probing question, to offer counterpoint when you think it is valid and should be part of the discussion. You are the reason we're here, and the connection will last well beyond our time together today. We look forward to collaborating with you in the months ahead. I truly believe our combined effort will help us get a few steps closer to our ultimate goal of eliminating housing discrimination altogether. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair Laura. We appreciate that. Again, my name is John Johnson, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of the Department of Civil Rights here in Michigan. I want to welcome you again to this third annual summit This has been a couple of years in the making, so we're very pleased to have this event today and to talk about what we think is obviously a very, very, very big problem in Michigan in terms of fair housing. We also know there's a problem surrounding affordable housing, and they are linked. We'll talk about that through the course of the day. But we're truly humbled by your presence and interest in this issue. And housing discrimination, as we know, is still prevalent and still dominates our society. Before we get started, I want to thank some of our generous sponsors who have helped us put this on today in terms of their generosity and monetary contributions. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, you know them as HUD, the Skillman Foundation, the Rocket family of companies, the National Association of Realtors, the Bank of America, the Michigan Health and Hospital Association, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, you know them as MISHDA, and CNS Healthcare. Let's give them all a round of applause. So our mission today is clearly stated in our theme to build inclusive communities and eliminate housing discrimination. Let's be clear, no single day of focus on a problem is complex and embedded in our culture as housing discrimination will cure this societal ill. But let it never be said that people of knowledge, determination, and heart cannot come together to make real change. We intend for this gathering of like minds to light the spark that leads to real and meaningful advances in the fight to eliminate housing discrimination. Indeed, the ills of this summit seek to remedy are varied and widespread. Despite the passage of the Fair Housing Act nearly 60 years ago, housing discrimination has not been abated. It may not be as overt and readily observable as it was at the time the act was passed, but its modern day ramifications may be tougher to fight specifically because it is not. As we know, those of us who are involved in this work, housing discrimination is often disguised behind a smile and a handshake. We are here to find solutions that look beyond that smile to the reality that families face every day in the effort to secure a home. We know that the problem is widespread and that it affects nearly every class of individuals protected by the civil rights laws that this department enforces: race, color, religion, national origin, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, familial status, marital status, and disability. We know that where you live impacts nearly every aspect of your life, from your wealth to your health, from the quality of schools your children attend to the availability of affordable, healthy food. And as anyone who has faced this kind of discrimination knows, it can leave you with a sense of hopelessness, a sense that no matter what you do, someone else is pulling the strings. One of the most devastating impacts of housing discrimination is the stranglehold it has on the ability to build wealth, both individually and generationally. For most of us, the road to wealth is through home ownership. If mortgage lending is unavailable to you, if realtors steer you to less desirable neighborhoods, if structural racism strips resources from certain neighborhoods and centralizes them in whiter, more affluent ones, building generational wealth may be a goal you are unlikely to reach. A 2021 Detroit News report showed that Black Detroiters were twice as likely to be denied mortgages as their white neighbors. And a recent study from the University of Michigan School of Public Health showed that historically redlined neighborhoods suffer from a variety of negative health concerns and outcomes, including a greater number of preterm births and an increase in mental health issues. The study points to a list of realities that are to blame, including resource hoarding by more affluent and white neighborhoods. The researchers point to systemic patterns of disinvestment in predominantly Black Detroit area neighborhoods that they contend are at the root of the health and wealth inequities that we see today. History is not only the predictor of inequities and discrimination in housing. We are seeing new and troubling evidence of emerging threats to fair housing, with families forced to contend with discrimination from both us as human beings, but also artificial intelligence. While we don't yet have a full picture of the threat that AI poses to fair housing, Lisa Rice, President and CEO of the National Fair Housing Alliance, will tell us what we need to know to push back against some of the more destructive ways it can impact our ability to buy, rent, and finance a home. I encourage you to be an active participant in this day. Take notes, ask questions, offer suggestions, and be ready to help us take what we learned today to shape it into real, concrete policy proposals to help eliminate discrimination in our time. We thank you for, again, being here. We hope this will be a productive day for you. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Are you guys all ready for the day? All right. Are you ready? Okay. My name is Nancy Haynes, and I'm the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Center of West Michigan. And it's my distinct pleasure this morning to be able to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Lisa Rice, the CEO and President of the National Fair Housing Alliance. As President and CEO of the National Fair Housing Alliance, otherwise known as NAFA, Ms. Rice directs its mission to eliminate all forms of housing discrimination and ensure equitable housing opportunities for all people and all communities. NAFA leads the nation and is the go-to expert on fair housing issues. There are 170 members that across the country that NAFA is kind of the leader of, and we're not franchisees, but rather we're committed to the same mission. While at NAFA, Lisa Rice has worked extensively to advance fair housing principles and to preserve and broaden fair housing protections, resulting in expanded equal housing opportunities for millions of Americans. She's a published author, contributing to several books and journals. She's also one of the nation's leading experts on fair housing, fair lending, and responsible AI policies, having played major roles in crafting sections of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, establishing the Office of Fair Lending within the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and implementing other legislative and policy initiatives. She probably will look familiar to you because she's often a commentator on MSNBC and CNN, and she's also been asked to testify in front of Congress and in front of committees on the Hill. She's also a local girl. She got her start at the Toledo Fair Housing Center as a high school intern, worked her way up there in the trenches to become CEO before heading to NAFA. So without any further delay, I'd like to welcome Lisa Rice.
Nancy, thank you so much for that very, very kind introduction. And I am so pleased to be here with you all. I want to also thank and acknowledge Mr. John Johnson. I don't know where he went, who is, as you all know, the Executive Director of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. I just want to thank him for having me here, and thank you all for inviting me to participate in your Fair Housing Conference. I'm really humbled to be here with you, particularly during this month, June, which is National Homeownership Month. I also want to acknowledge the members of the National Fair Housing Alliance. Nancy talked about the local fair housing organizations who are on the ground providing direct assistance to people who face discrimination. So if you work for a local fair housing organization, would you please stand? Thank you for your dedication. We even have, Amy Nelson is from Indiana, so Michigan, you drew the crowd in, okay, from across the globe. I also want to acknowledge anyone who works at HUD or for a FAP agency. I saw some people from DOJ. There might be some folks here who work for a state AG. If you're in the audience, please stand too. And if you work for a civil rights law firm, I want you to stand. Okay, now, I did that for a reason. Because this fight, the fight for fair housing, is a huge fight. It's a huge fight, and it takes all of us working together to address fair housing discrimination and bias in our housing, lending, and insurance markets. Together, all of the people who stood, we make up the fair housing ecosystem. We work together, we play separate roles, but we cannot be successful without one another. And it is because we have learned over the decades how to work in tandem with one another that we have been able to address some of the largest challenges to fair housing opportunities our nation has faced. We've together addressed algorithmic bias, together we have addressed appraisal bias, redlining in both the lending and insurance sectors, real estate blockbusting and steering. We have tackled some really huge challenges. Now, we realize that the job is not done. We still have more challenges to face, and a lot of the challenges that we have to face going forward are systemic. Breaking down systems and structures that are perpetuating bias and discrimination. Systems like residential segregation, zoning laws and policies, the dual credit market, and of course, bias technologies. Now, there's another reason why I wanted everyone in the fair housing ecosystem to stand. Over the past few weeks, social media and the mainstream media have exploded with stories, two high-profile stories about people who have faced discrimination. One is Dr. Raven Baxter, who is a molecular biologist. Excuse me, I'm starting my stopwatch so I don't go over. Dr. Raven Baxter is a molecular biologist from the DMV, where I now live. She's also a science educator, and she attempted to purchase a home in Virginia Beach. She started the process online. She submitted an offer. The seller accepted the offer. And so she was excited about this brand new house she was buying close to the beach. And she and her partner drove from DC down to Virginia Beach. It's about a 4-hour drive to see this new home that she was purchasing. And that is when the homeowner saw Dr. Baxter and that she is Black. The homeowner immediately contacted her real estate listing agent to inform the agent that she would never sell her home to a Black person, and she instructed her agent to cancel the contract. Now, a shocking case of discrimination, but those forms of discrimination still happen. The second high-profile case involved noted actor Wendell Pierce, who recently shared the story of his attempts to rent an apartment in Harlem. Despite providing his income, his financial profile, he was denied, and then he offered to pay for the unit 12 months in advance. The owner still denied him an apartment for rent. Now, there are a couple of common threads between these two really horrible events. One is that the stories went viral. Tens of thousands of people commented on social media posts made by both Dr. Baxter and Wendell Pierce. People expressed their disappointment, their dismay, their disgust. The second common thread that I want to point out is that neither Mr. Pierce nor Dr. Baxter knew what to do when they faced discrimination. In fact, Dr. Baxter, when she went on social media, she was asking, what do I do? Like, I can't believe somebody can do this to me. And literally tens of thousands of people commented about how horrible this was, but it was very, very clear that the commenters didn't know what to do either. They didn't know where to go for help. They didn't know where to go for assistance. They didn't know that there are private fair housing groups who provide people free service. They didn't know about HUD. They didn't know about the FAP agencies. They simply had no idea what they could do. Now, I have to say I'm really glad we were able to connect with Mr. Pierce. He appeared on MSNBC this past Sunday. I don't know if you all saw him, but he did an incredible job talking about the housing discrimination that he faced. And because we were able to get to him before he went on MSNBC, if you watched the segment, you noted that he lifted up the Legal Defense Fund and the National Fair Housing Alliance as two key resources for people to go to and organizations that are addressing housing discrimination. But what this signified to me is that we really must together, work together to amp up our efforts to educate the public about housing discrimination and, more importantly, where they can go for help. Now, I'm going to say this, and I'm not being biased. It just is a fact. The first place people should go is to their local fair housing agency. That's where they get their claims investigated. That's where they get the direct one-on-one assistance. That's where they get the fair housing counseling they need. And then the fair housing groups, once they have investigated the case and built the case up, then pass it on to HUD or to a FAP organization or a civil rights law firm. It is that evidence that the private fair housing groups build and develop that makes the case more successful and increases the likelihood exponentially that that survivor of discrimination is going to get the remedy and assistance that they need. Now, the other thing that fair housing groups will do, and this is the thing that really frustrates me about Dr. Baxter's situation in particular, is the first thing she should have done was seek a temporary restraining order. That would have given her the best opportunity to preserve and maintain her rights throughout this process. And she didn't get a TRO because she didn't know. It's a travesty. So we together must be committed to doing a better job. Now, let me tell you this. If the public doesn't know what to do when they face more blatant forms of discrimination, like the instances that I just talked about with Dr. Baxter and Wendell Pierce, how informed do you think the general public is about algorithmic bias? They're not informed at all. How well do you think the general public would be able to recognize that they were being discriminated against by some form of technology? And if they did happen to recognize it, like was the case with the Apple Card, where women, so you had couples, a man and a wife, they both applied for the Apple Card, instances where the woman made more money in the household and had a better financial profile, didn't matter. She got a worse offer and offers with worse terms and conditions than did her husband. Now, in a situation like that, that's like a testing situation within a household, right? But those folks didn't know where to go for assistance. And too many don't know where to go. I can tell you that the general public is ill-informed about algorithmic bias, but that's not all. Many of us in the fair housing ecosystem and regulators who are overseeing corporations and entities that are implementing and using these systems are also ill-informed about their potential for registering bias for millions of people. In fact, Technologies are driving millions of acts of discrimination each day. The challenge is we just can't see it. Now, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I will say when I was a tiny tot in the 1990s, fingers crossed, legs crossed, I can remember when I worked for the Toledo Fair Housing Center, my boss was a woman very revered in the fair housing movement. Her name was Shauna Smith. And I remember Key Bank came to the Toledo Fair Housing Center and told us about this brand new technology that they were being asked to purchase from a company called FICO, and it was a credit score. And FICO was promising that this credit score could help Key Bank underwrite mortgages for people and also help Key Bank determine what price they should charge for people. And so we said, well, did they give you the algorithmic formula that is behind the credit score? And they said, no, it's proprietary, it's in a hidden box, we can't see it, it's a trade secret. And we said, well, we can guarantee you that if that credit score is being built with data collected from the financial services and housing market, it will be generating bias, it'll be discriminating against people, and we can also guarantee you that if you use a discriminatory tool like that and someone files a lawsuit against you, you will be held liable for discrimination. Well, unfortunately, our financial regulators sanctioned the use of credit scoring models, but also later sanctioned the use of automated underwriting models and risk-based pricing systems. Now, why did regulators sanction the use of these systems? They did it because the developers spread a number of myths about these technologies. The first is that algorithms are just merely mathematical functions and therefore they don't discriminate. Math doesn't discriminate. Computers don't see race. They are colorblind. That was the second myth. The third myth is that these technologies do not discriminate because race, gender, national origin, and other protected characteristics are not included in the formulas. I hear the laugh. And then the other myth they spread was that technologies broaden access to more consumers and streamline processes. They standardize decision-making, and they reduce costs to consumers. Now, I've been in this business for a long time. I can tell you that with the increase in technologies in the financial services and housing space, I have not seen pricing go down to consumers. So that last one was definitely a lie. In fact, all of the above are lies. And they all have now been debunked because of the research we've been doing at the National Fair Housing Alliance and research being done by other organizations, universities, right, have debunked all of these myths. Nothing that I just said, none of those myths are true. Technologies can see race and gender quicker than the human eye can. In fact, there is a technological company that has AI so sophisticated that they can tell whether you are a man or a woman just how you tap your phone. Technologies do see race, they do see gender, and they do see national origin. Variables used in the formulas often serve as proxies for protected class characteristics. So many variables that are used in these systems are highly correlated to race. In fact, credit score is highly correlated to race. LTV, the loan-to-value ratio, highly correlated to race. There's so many factors that are used in these algorithmic models that are correlated to race that combined, they essentially equate to including the protected class characteristic in the model. So it is not true that protected class is not included as a variable in the models. They are. They are included. And not only do these systems discriminate, but they amplify and magnify the bias because AI systems and automated systems can make decisions, right, at a really fast pace. They also shield and obfuscate the bias because the systems and formulas are hidden from the public. There's nowhere you can go and pick up a document that tells you exactly what the formula is for the FICO Classic credit score. But we happen to know, because we've been doing a lot of research on this issue, that the Classic FICO credit score, which is the credit score required for every single mortgage loan delivered in the United States, if you go through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, or VA, that FICO score is the required score. But FICO dings you up to 20 points if you access credit outside of the financial mainstream and pay your obligation on time. Let me say that again. You access credit outside of the financial mainstream, you never miss a payment. You are never late. The model dings you by up to 19 points. It penalizes you for accessing credit outside of the financial mainstream. Who disproportionately accesses credit outside of the financial mainstream? People of color. Who disproportionately lives in credit deserts? People of color. So you see, and I could go on and on and on about how the FICO score perpetuates, the classic FICO score perpetuates bias. We've seen how facial recognition systems fail too many people and are often highly inaccurate when it comes to detecting the faces of women and men of color. One analysis showed that some face recognition systems have a 65.3% rate of accuracy for dark-skinned women. That 65.3% is a failing grade the last time I checked. My organization, the National Fair Housing Alliance, hosted a hackathon last year to examine where automated valuation models hold bias. Our teams found that automated valuation models are not very accurate in predominantly Latino and Black neighborhoods. In fact, in many Black communities, the AVMs only had a 15% rate of accuracy. 15%. One study found that risk-based pricing systems used by mortgage companies discriminate against Black and Latino consumers. In fact, Black and Latinos with the same credit profiles as white consumers are currently paying $765 million every year in higher interest rate fees because they were charged an interest rate that is higher than their commensurate level of risk. Excuse me. Now, I could go on and on and on, but I won't. I think you get the picture. These systems discriminate against people. And I want to lift up several new developments that the National Fair Housing Alliance has been working on at the federal level to address this issue. The first is a risk-based management framework that was developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. This framework provides a process and it provides guidelines that consider different laws, federal directives, executive orders, best practices and policies, and different regulations to develop and maintain algorithmic models. And so we were a part of developing the risk management framework that was issued by NIST, and we're encouraging every entity that uses an algorithmic model to adopt the NIST framework. We also worked with the White House on President Biden's executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence. This executive order recognizes both the benefits and the harms of AI, but it also establishes a coordinated government-wide approach for ensuring that AI is safe, secure, trustworthy, and non-discriminatory. The Biden administration also issued the AI Bill of Rights, and it contains 5 principles that should apply to every single automated model. The first is that the model is safe and effective. That means it must be accurate. So remember I talked about the face recognition systems, the AVMs. If the systems are not accurate, you can't use them. Algorithmic discrimination protection. If the systems perpetuate bias, you can't use them. Not if you are complying with this AI Bill of Rights. Data privacy is the third pillar. Notice and explanation. This is something that is very hard for AI systems. You have to be able to explain the decisions. And oftentimes, in fact, in most cases, you can't explain the decision because the science, the computing behind the decision is so complex, you cannot deconstruct it. And then the last, this is my favorite, human alternatives. There are too many instances where the AI doesn't work for people, and you should have a human option. You should have an out. You should not be subjecting people to AI systems that are harming them and not effectively serving them. You need to have a human alternative, a manual process so that people can be served and are not excluded. NAFA has also led efforts to address this issue. We released a policy guide for federal regulators and state regulators, honestly, on how to effectively govern and oversee institutions that use AI systems. We also released a report providing recommendations for ensuring that consumers' information is protected and that their privacy rights are protected. One thing that we know about AI is if you apply AI to a particular model or a data set of information, you can basically identify people. So you have to have controls in place so that people's privacy rights are not disrupted. And then the last thing that I want to lift up is that we released a report. It's exciting new research that we just conducted in conjunction with one of our partners, Fair Play AI, on a novel approach for debiasing underwriting and pricing systems. This approach is called distribution matching. And our preliminary research findings are that we can reduce underwriting disparities and underwriting models by up to 15% for Black and Latino consumers. That is a lot. So essentially, we can compel the system to be fairer so that it approves 15% more Black and Latino consumers. And then also, using distribution matching, we saw a reduction in pricing disparities by up to 20% for Black and Latino consumers. That's that overpricing that I was talking about earlier. Now, the last thing that I want to share before I sit down and the panel comes up is that Congress is working their way through federal legislation. Congress has been at an impasse. They haven't been able to agree and pass legislation on anything, let alone technology and AI. But I have been often asked if I think that we'll have a large omnibus federal bill that is all-encompassing, and I don't think that's going to happen. I don't see a pathway for that. I think what we are more likely to see is Congress take a piecemeal approach and pass law after law after law that addresses all of the different challenges that I've just discussed. So privacy, there are a number of members of Congress working on a privacy bill. There are a number of members of Congress working on a security bill. There are members of Congress working on a bill to address deep fakes, fraud. So I think they're going to take this sort of sectional, piecemeal approach to developing legislation. And the exciting thing is that states are actually leading the way. So if the state of Michigan is interested in passing a really good AI bill, just contact us. We'd be happy to share with you any information and knowledge that we have. So I'm going to end there because I know the panel's going to come up for a robust discussion to dig deeper into more of these issues. And I thank you so much for having me.
All right, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Can we give another round of applause also for us for that excellent, just an unbelievable presentation, a wealth of information, and we're going to kind of expound on that. Just a point of order. I know that we normally have a 10-minute break in between, so we can all move about. So I'm going to take a little bit more time for this session. We're scheduled to end 10:15. We're running a little bit behind, so we'll probably extend this session by maybe 10 minutes or so, just so we can make sure that all the information that we have to share, we want to ensure that you receive a great deal of value in all of the insights that our panelists have to say. But I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming you to the opening plenary of the 2024 Civil Rights Summit on Fair Housing. This morning's topic is artificial intelligence and housing equity, navigating fair housing in an artificial intelligence world. Every day we hear all these concepts about AI, and Ms. Rice really kind of teed us up with this with her remarks. So, are there opportunities to explore, or is it all negative? And what we're going to do today, our panel is going to explore the impact of artificial intelligence on how we rent and buy homes every day. Now, let me introduce Dr. Molly Kleinman, who is the Managing Director of Science, Technology, and Public Policy Program at the Ford School of Public Policy for the University of Michigan. Before Dr. Kleinman comes up, I just wanted to add a few ground rules about the discussion. Okay, first, the workshop is about fair housing, not just housing. We are focused on bias, discrimination, disparate impacts in buying or renting a home, or related to credit ratings or mortgages. We would like to end this session with 2 to 3 specific policy recommendations for moving fair housing forward. We welcome comments and potential solutions for the issues being discussed. Please keep discussions focused on the topic of the discussion. For example, we are unable to address individual complaints at this forum. We are focused on broad policy discussions. Also, we will not tolerate inappropriate, inflammatory, or disrespectful behavior or language. You will be warned once, and then you will be escorted out. And those that know me know you will be escorted out. So now, without further ado, Dr. Molly Kleinman.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Molly. It's great to be here today. I'm really excited to be in a room full of housing advocates. That's not my usual room. I have some slides today. I think they're going to appear on the screen at some point. I'm going to take us to kind of a nerdy place for a little while. To help us have this conversation about AI, I thought it would be really helpful for us to hear a little bit about what we mean, what we're talking about when we say AI. It's become a real buzzword. People are throwing AI around left and right, but how you define something shapes how you regulate it. And so we're talking about concrete policy decisions, regulations, and I want to make sure that we are all sharing a definition about what we're talking about. Looks like the slides aren't coming. This is totally fine. I will just be reading some things to you. Oh, here we go. Yes. Here we go, fair housing and AI. So I'm going to take us through a few different definitions of what we're talking about when we talk about AI. I'm going to start with the most technical, and I'm going to take us to a less technical place. Let's see which button I'm supposed to push. There we go. I'm going to read this. This is too much text for one slide. The term, this is from the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative Act of 2020. This is the same definition that is now being used in the more recent federal legislation about AI. The term artificial intelligence means a machine-based system that can, for a given set of human-defined objectives, make predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing real or virtual environments. Artificial intelligence systems use machine and human-based inputs to A, perceive real and virtual environments, B, abstract such perceptions into models through analysis in an automated manner, and C, use model inference to formulate options for information or action. All right, let's dissect this a little bit. Machine-based, it's a computer. It lives in a machine, which is usually a computer. Human-defined objectives. It relies on human guidance and direction. This part is really important. Ms. Rice mentioned earlier that these tools perpetuate exactly the same sorts of bias and discrimination that humans do. It's because they were built by humans. They come from a society with problems, and they reflect those same problems. They are not outside of it. Makes predictions, recommendations, or decisions. That's the output. You put in a question to one of these tools, and out comes a recommendation of some kind. Perceives real and virtual environments. This is where data comes in. So a lot of what we're dealing with AI is actually about data. The data that's used to train these models, the data that comes out of these models. We heard a little bit about privacy, about the major privacy concerns that happen with the way we collect and aggregate and sell data about everyone in this country. And that data is what informs these tools, and then also what comes out of them. And then it abstracts perceptions into models, so that's math and statistics on all that data that we just talked about. So if you like all of these things, how likely are you to like something else? It's all math. It's not magic. It's math. And then use model inference, so that's where the predictions come in. So the next definition of AI, which I think if we can get the slides back, it'll be on the screen. This one is less wordy. This comes from the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights that we were just hearing about. And this one, instead of focusing on the technical aspects of what AI can do, this one is focusing on the social and political aspects of what it can do. So they are automated systems that have the potential to meaningfully impact the American public's rights, opportunities, or access to critical resources or services, like housing. This is all the math and statistics from the previous definition, but this math and statistics has real-world consequences in real people's lives. Things like whether or not they can find a place to live, whether or not that place is safe, whether or not that place is accessible to them. And so the consequences of these tools reflect values even when they're intended to be neutral and fair. But not all of them are even intended to be neutral and fair. And that's important to remember as well. So finally, we have one more slide about these definitions. And this one comes from Dr. Alondra Nelson. She was the acting director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. She came and did a wonderful event at the Ford School, all about AI, not so much about housing, but if you're interested, I encourage you to find it on the Ford School's website. So she said in that event, AI is a tool. It's math, statistics, software, and hardware. And that definition is just as accurate as the extremely technical one I started with. And I think it's really important because people need to understand what they're advocating about. And often all of the technical jargon, all of the math and statistics is used to intimidate people from engaging on these things. Well, that's AI, I can't possibly understand it. It's used to exclude people from the conversation. And one of the things I want you all to take away today is that each of you has expertise that is relevant to the conversation about regulating AI. Regardless of what work you do, you work in housing, your expertise is relevant here. And when things get really, really technical and really, really jargony, ask what they're trying to hide. They're hiding something behind that jargon. And often it's hand-waving. They don't often know exactly how these models work. And so that's a key thing I want you to come away from this as well. So back to definitions a little bit. Another thing that happens with muddying the waters around AI is that a lot of the boosters, when they talk about AI safety, they're talking about a sort of distant future where AI is going to become so intelligent that there's like a robot apocalypse situation happening. And that's the kind of thing they want to regulate around. And to do that, to shift that focus into some future robot apocalypse with the Terminator, it means that we're not talking about the harms that AI is doing right now, the harms that we heard about from Lisa. And so again, what are they trying to hide when they talk about a distant magical future? Often it's the harm happening in the present. So there are a few common types of AI, getting back into the nitty-gritty of definitions. So bring back the slides up for a second. I've got this little list. Oh, right, that's another important thing. What the AI is not. It's not intelligent. It's not original. It's not self-aware. So the AI of science fiction movies, the AI of the Terminator, that's not what we're dealing with here. It is not any of those things. So again, it's not magic, it's math, it's statistics. It's really just one or two steps beyond the algorithmic bias tools that we've been seeing, especially in housing, for literal decades. So some common types of things that we're calling AI right now. The big one we're hearing about all the time is ChatGPT, which is a kind of generative AI, where you can feed in a prompt or ask a question and it will draw a picture for you or it will write you text. We're calling this generative AI, even though it's mostly just a copy machine. It's taking text it looked at elsewhere and it's regurgitating it in different orders. Recommender systems, so like with Netflix, if you liked The Price is Right, you might like Jeopardy. Predictive tools, so these are things like cancer risk algorithms, things that claim based on previous data to make a prediction, an accurate prediction about what's likely to happen in the future. Pattern matching, which is how facial recognition works. It has a giant database of faces. You give it a face and it will compare it to that giant database of faces and tell you this looks like this other person. Maybe it's the same one. And then you've got combinations of these things. So autonomous vehicles use pattern matching to detect all the stuff around them on the street, and then they're also being predictive to guess how is that bicyclist going to move, what's going to happen with that traffic light. So what do these things look like in a housing context? So a lot of the tools that we're talking about are going to be predictive tools. They're going to be tools where they claim to tell you about risk. How risky is it to rent this apartment to someone? How risky is it to lend money to someone? And these are, like, it's all really just trying to make predictions. Recommender systems, this is things like if someone is searching Zillow for a house, what do they get shown? Well, depending on what the system thinks it knows about the person looking, it might recommend certain neighborhoods. It might recommend certain price ranges, regardless of what that person actually wants or needs. So those are some examples of what it can look like in housing. Coming back to the slides for a second, I have a graph. I'm so sorry. But it's not bad. I'm going to walk you through it. This is the Gartner hype cycle, and I think it's really important for thinking about AI, especially in this particular moment. So at the bottom of the hype cycle, we've got the technology trigger. So the vertical axis is visibility, the horizontal axis is time. So you have a new technology that's just come out, it's brand new, and it quickly gains visibility. More and more people are hearing about it and talking about it. There's breathless articles in the New York Times about this, whatever this new technology is. The key thing to know about the hype cycle, this happens over and over again with technologies. This is a very familiar cycle until it eventually reaches the peak of inflated expectations. So AI is magic. AI can do anything. AI is going to replace teachers and lawyers, and it's going to build you a house. And half of that's not real. Probably there are some really great things that AI can do, but they're all mixed in with the hype. And at this moment with AI, we are at the highest possible peak of inflated expectations. And it is really difficult to separate what's realistic. Where might it actually be helpful? Could we maybe improve the housing system, improve access to housing using some of these tools? Maybe, probably. But what's real and what's hype is very hard to tease out right now. I think soon we're going to get into this dip where we get down to the trough of disillusionment, where people start to realize, actually, no, it's not magic. It's not going to build you a house. And then people start to get really skeptical, and maybe even too skeptical, and really dismissive. There's a lot of disappointment. And eventually we get into this slope of enlightenment where we figure out what can it do, what can't it do. It sort of enters into just the general pool of technologies we're used to using. And then we reach the plateau of productivity, where it's just kind of part of the landscape. And so I walk us through this because we're so high at the top of that peak right now with AI, and it just makes all of this harder to parse. And when you hear about, oh, this new tool is going to change everything, is it real or is it hype? Be really skeptical. So I'm going to keep taking us through. I'm almost done here. I want to talk just briefly one example about what this looks like in housing. None of the words on this slide matter. It's a screenshot of the tenant screening algorithms policy intervention policy memo that my research center released last fall, where we worked with a group called Detroit Action. I don't know if there's anyone from Detroit Action here, but they wanted to understand how these tenant screening tools were affecting the communities that they work with. So we dug into it, and we found some stuff. The key takeaways that we had on tenant screening algorithms specifically are that they are not reliable, they enable housing discrimination, and they're very expensive for the people seeking housing. So landlords tend to pass these costs on to renters, and that means that you might be paying $50, $100 every time you apply to rent an apartment. And if the system is saying that you're high risk, you might be doing that over and over and over again. And the part about how they're inaccurate is a big problem, but I want to make clear that the inaccuracies are a problem and they cause harm. Even if these systems were perfectly accurate, they would still be harmful. The inaccuracy part is because they're totally automated. So they're pulling all kinds of information from the internet, all kinds of data from different sources, and they're making a prediction. And they're basically, there's lots of regulation now about credit scores. We were hearing about credit scores, and we've got a lot of regulation about what can go into them, when you can use them. These tenant screening tools are a way to skirt those rules, because they can find things like, do you have a JPay account? JPay being the system that you use to transfer money and make phone calls to people who are incarcerated. Yeah, that's a new one I just learned. They can look at whether or not there's been an eviction proceeding filed against you, not whether you've actually been evicted. Only about 10% of eviction filings actually lead to evictions. So they can count those filings against an applicant. That's the kind of accurate data, correct data that can cause harm. But then also because they're automated, they get a lot of stuff wrong. They attribute things to someone's sibling or someone who has the same name or someone completely else. The Consumer Finance Protection Bureau collects consumer complaints about all kinds of things in finance and housing. And over a 3-year period, they got almost 30,000 complaints about tenant screening tools. And about 2/3 of those complaints were about inaccuracies. So the tools are wrong a lot. And that's just sort of, I wanted to give us that one technology example, but there are a lot of different kinds of technologies and different points in the housing process where these come in, but they share a lot of the same problems. They share these harms of inaccuracies, violating people's privacy, bringing in information that's illegal to consider into housing decisions. I'm gonna stop there so that we can have a conversation as a panel, but thank you all so much.
All right. Okay, thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Kleinman. One of the things I want to do in the essence of time, The first thing I'm going to do before we get into a discussion is that I do want to see if there are any audience questions, because we've had two excellent presentations that's kind of laid out some of the concerns and some of the responses. Are there any questions from our audience? And also, if we can if some of our folks who are working with the different breakouts, if we can let them know that we're going to be about 10 minutes behind schedule, so they have a few more minutes, because we want to take a few more minutes in this panel. So just know that if they can, if our helpers can let folks know in the other breakout rooms that we'll be about 10 minutes behind. So any questions from our audience about what you've heard so far? If you wanted to be a part of if you wanted to make a difference and be a part of fair housing, how would you go about doing that?
I'm just trying to get that up, but it wasn't coming up. So that's a great question. And one of the things that you can do is volunteer at your local fair housing organization. We use lots of volunteers to help with our investigations. So for example, we conduct testing. And I think everybody knows what testing is, right? It's a simulated housing transaction. And we take volunteers from the community in order to engage in those testing practices. But there are other ways that you can participate too. We have campaigns, calls to action. You can respond to those calls to action. You can sign on to the letters that we issue, asking for different policies to be implemented or changes to be made to certain policies. You can also participate in hackathons. You can participate in red teaming exercises, blue teaming exercises. So there are lots of things that you can participate in, and I encourage you to reach out and kind of pay attention to the communications coming from your local fair housing groups. There might be a local university that is sponsoring an event that you can participate in. And then, of course, attending forums like this is important as well.
Yes, Jeff, sorry. Yes.
What is your biggest concern with disability discrimination as it relates to AI and technology?
What is your biggest concern regarding disability discrimination with artificial intelligence technology?
So I can start with this. AI often enables the kind of discrimination against people with disabilities that a lot of landlords and housing authorities are doing already. AI makes it faster and easier and cheaper to discriminate against people with disabilities. It makes it easier often to identify a person with disabilities, again, because of the huge troves of data that these tools are calling on. So I think, when we talk about what the regulatory response needs to be to a lot of these tools, the fact is we already have fair housing legislation. We already have the ADA, although the ADA should be a floor, not a ceiling. But we haven't figured out how to enforce the laws we already have against these new technologies and in this new context. And so in terms of what the biggest threat is, it's how easy these tools make discrimination against disabled people. In terms of how we respond, it's not often about new laws. It's about doing better at enforcing the laws we already have.
Yeah, and I would add to that, that people with disabilities are often not included in the development of these systems. And so if the data you're using to build the system has what we call missingness in it, or the data is misrepresentative, it will oftentimes discriminate against that group that was not equitably represented in the development of the tool. So one example that I can lift up in addition to what Molly has said is we know that for fraud detection, the longer you take to fill out a form, or if you make an error in filling out a form, that will be a flag for fraud, indicating that you're trying to engage in fraud. And we know from research that people with disabilities do take a longer time to fill out the forms.
Hi, Dora with Housing Kent. Is there any positive ways that you can use AI for fair housing? And have there been any positive unintended consequences that have been found with AI that you can do now that wasn't something that you were able to do before this happened?
Do you have some? Sure. Sure. So we have a responsible AI lab at the National Fair Housing Alliance. So we have data scientists and engineers and software developers who not only conduct the research, but build a lot of AI tools. So yes, we're in fact involved in a couple of lawsuits represented by the great Sarah Pratt and her law firm and other law firms. They're very, very large cases. They're systemic cases. In fact, I think both Amy and Nancy are plaintiffs with us in these cases. One is against Bank of America for wide-scale discrimination, Bank of America and Deutsche Bank for discriminating against communities of color. And in our production, our request for production of documents, they have sent us millions and millions and millions of pages. And of course, those pages all go to Sarah, and she has to read every one. But Sarah said, no, I can't read all these pages. So our research lab developed an AI tool that goes through all of the documents and reads the documents at a fast clip, and it automates the process of searching for the keywords and phrases that we want to find. So that's one example.
Yeah, and I would just add that these same tools that the banks and landlords are using to find patterns in large quantities of data, advocates can also be using to find other kinds of patterns, like patterns of discrimination that might have been much harder to detect without using these larger scale data tools. So there are ways that we can turn these tools to our own advantage.
Good morning. You mentioned, there was mention of the harm in the present and how we're focusing on policies to take on the new AI crisis and things. But I was wondering about what could we do more to hold the regulators and the people who are doing the work more accountable? We have research and data that problems are still going on and people are affected in a negative way. And so how can we improve accountability in folks who are supposed to protect and supposed to lead and provide the information? And I'm not trying to call anyone out, but I want to understand as the problem gets worse and we're starting to move into technology and we still have issues in the standard practice, what can we do to evolve our regulators and give them more autonomy or more support to help us so the problems can go down and our statistics can go down? Like, how do we get ourselves out of this systemic process?
I'm looking to you, yeah.
That is an excellent question, and one that we have been talking to regulators about. We just held a responsible AI symposium at the beginning of this year where we had a chance to sit down with all of the heads of each of the regulatory agencies, and we posed this issue to them. And they shared a couple of things. One, they said that our current laws can be applied to issues of AI bias. They also said that the current risk management frameworks and data management frameworks should also be used by developers and users of AI services. And then the last thing that they did was they all committed to hiring more data scientists, and you're seeing them do that. They're hiring more engineers, more data scientists, and they're also engaging in more training opportunities. They're meeting with civil rights organizations and other organizations to learn about how these systems perpetuate bias. So they do, make no mistake, they have a huge learning curve. Because as we pointed out at the Responsible AI Symposium, they have vetted and approved all of these discriminatory systems that have been harming millions of consumers. And by the regulators approving these systems, they basically have given a pass to entities that are using the systems to discriminate. And so they all vowed to do a better job to learn about the issue, to bring on the technological expertise that they need to have, and also to partner more closely with civil and human rights organizations to address these problems.
Okay, we're going to take one more question, and then I'll ask our panelists a question.
Thank you, Ms. Rice. This is kind of on the same topic with LLPA's loan level price adjustments and that risk-based pricing from what you were just talking about. Our federal legislators and policy, really looking at policy, have we had those conversations to talk about not only using different scoring models, but to also look at actually adjusting, because you were speaking about how they've been using FICO, for instance, the same old scoring model for years and years, with the LLPAs and the risk-based pricing moving on it, like us moving into 2024 and where we're at now and how we should be looking at ways to get people into homes.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So LLPAs is a reference to the loan level pricing adjustments that are set by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they have to be used for the entire industry. So for example, a lender who wants to sell their loan to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac doesn't have a choice. They have to use the loan level pricing adjustment grid that Fannie and Freddie establish. The way that the pricing grids were put in place, it perpetuated discrimination. And it was not data-driven, it was assumption-driven. So we have worked with the Federal Housing Finance Agency, that is the regulator for the GSEs, that's Fannie and Freddie's regulator. We've worked with them for years to encourage them to use a data analytic approach to setting the loan level pricing adjustments, because research shows that there are some people who have a low FICO score, but they perform on their loan better than people who have a higher FICO score. There are some people who have higher loan-to-value ratios, but they perform better than some people who have higher loan-to-value ratios. Same thing with debt-to-income ratios. There are some people who have high debt-to-income ratios who perform better than people who have a low debt-to-income ratio. And so the Federal Housing Finance Agency undertook a major examination, data-driven, and they adjusted the LLPAs. And now, I have to admit, we've been asking them to do this for about 20 years. No, not 20 years, since the crisis, because they were implemented in the crisis, so since 2008. We've been asking them to change it, and they just now changed it last year. So at least it happened. And then the other thing that we've been encouraging them to do is adopt a different credit score other than classic FICO, and they also approved that last year. But it won't be implemented. We just got an announcement. It will not be implemented until 2025.
Okay, I have one question that I'd like to, unfortunately, obviously, we're kind of pressed for time. I want to ensure that everyone gets the full enjoyment of our summit here. But one question is, can you discuss the balance between AI model privacy, I guess like folks' intellectual property and protecting that, but also at the same time protecting the public from discrimination? Because often I think what you hear is from the developers, well, I don't want my property, I don't want this algorithm or this, because this is proprietary, but at the same time, you discussed about, well, if there's something in that algorithm, or if the data you're pulling from in and of itself has certain, biases in the data. How do we, what is the balance between protecting that, but also protecting the public from discrimination?
I mean, at this point, it's so imbalanced. The corporations have all the power. They hold all the cards in this space. We don't have national privacy legislation in this country. We don't have any rules to protect what companies collect about people or what they do with the data that they collect. So, like, we wouldn't have had to ban TikTok if we had just passed privacy legislation, for example. TikTok is doing what all of these social media companies are doing, what all of these banks are doing. They're collecting and selling all the data that they can. So there's no balance right now, and what I would love to see is a shift in the other direction, where they have to be transparent. If they're using these tools to make decisions that affect people's lives, we have to know what's in them. They shouldn't get to protect the data behind what's going into these tools. They should be able to tell us with certainty, these are the factors, this is what they told us.
Yeah, and I would encourage folks to, if you go to our website, National Fair Housing Alliance, and look under our reports, we released a report late last year in conjunction with the Tech Equity Collaborative on this very issue, examining this tension that you were talking about. This, quite frankly, is an issue that we have run into for many, many years. I can lift up the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data as an example of, one example of this tension, where those of us in the civil rights space want more data to be released to the public so we can examine and discern whether or not there is discrimination occurring against certain groups of people. But the reality is the more data you release to the public, the easier it is to identify people within that data. And so one of the recommendations that we have, well, two recommendations I'll lift up. One is to use universities and institutions like Molly's institution as a trusted researcher. So what that means is Molly would get access to data that the general public wouldn't be able to see. And then Molly goes in, she does the analysis to sort of discern if there's discrimination against different segments of the population. And so we just have to kind of trust that Molly's doing the right thing. And she has to be properly vetted, right? The second thing that we lift up is using what we call privacy enhancing AI to help protect consumers' data and information.
Well, thank you. To our panelists, thank you. One of the things, and obviously we could discuss this, we could probably take the entire day discussing and with a Q&A and discussing some of the different things, but one of the things we want to do is I want to thank our panelists. If we could just give our panelists a round of applause for all of your work and your insight. We appreciate it. Now, obviously, we're going to close this session, and we're going to take about a 10-minute break, just so you know, with your workshops. For those who are leading workshops, we're going to ensure that you have the full time with your workshops. We're going to make our time up during our luncheon, so everyone will have their full time for their workshops. Also, just so you know, our workshops are State of Fair Housing in Michigan, past, present, and possibilities, right here in environmental justice, fair and just, affordable and sustainable fair housing in the era of climate change and real estate industry. Renter's journey and recipe for success, and then also we will have legal updates, the legal landscape of fair housing in 2024. So everyone, thank you very much, and we hope that you enjoy our summit. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.